The morning light filtered through my kitchen window as I adjusted the collar of my indigo dress, the one with tiny pearl buttons that had belonged to my mother. My fingers trembled slightly, not from age, but from something I couldn't quite name. Today was my 77th birthday, and for the first time in decades, I felt like prey. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Happy birthday, Mother Eileen. Marcia's voice had been syrupy sweet when she called yesterday. My daughter-in-law of 15 years, who normally communicated through my son Percy in terse, obligatory exchanges. I'd love to take you to lunch tomorrow, just the two of us. It's time we got to know each other better. The invitation felt wrong, like finding a snake coiled in a basket of roses. Marcia had never shown interest in knowing me better. In fact, she'd spent years systematically erasing me from family gatherings, holiday photos, and my own son's life, but something in her tone made me accept. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was the foolish hope that at 77, I might finally matter to someone in my family again. I'd lived in this house for 43 years, raised 3 children here, buried a husband from the front parlor. Now it felt like a museum of my own irrelevance. My youngest, Harry, lived in California and called twice a year, Christmas and my birthday, duty calls that lasted exactly long enough to assuage his guilt. My daughter Lori lived just 2 towns over but treated me like an embarrassing relic, visiting only when she needed something. And Percy, my firstborn, the child I'd sacrificed everything for, he'd become Marcia's puppet, dancing to her tune while she slowly, methodically cut every string that connected him to me. The doorbell rang at exactly noon. Marcia stood on my porch wearing designer sunglasses and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was 45, 15 years younger than Percy, with the kind of polished appearance that money could buy and confidence could perfect. Everything about her was calculated, from her honey blonde highlights to her French manicure to the way she tilted her head when she spoke, as if everyone else was slightly simple. "You look lovely, Eileen," she said, though her eyes never met mine. "Ready for your special day?" I grabbed my purse, an old leather bag that had seen better decades, and followed her to the gleaming black SUV in my driveway. The interior smelled like expensive perfume and leather conditioner. Marcia's world always smelled clean, antiseptic, devoid of the messy sense of real living. "Where are we going?" I asked as we pulled away from my house. Through the passenger window, I watched my neighborhood disappear. The mailbox I'd painted last spring, Mrs. Schumer's garden where she always waved, the bus stop where I caught the 42 downtown twice a week for groceries. "It's a surprise," Marcia said, her manicured fingers drumming against the steering wheel. "Somewhere special. You'll love it." We drove through town, past the diner where Teddy and I used to have coffee every Sunday morning, past the library where I'd volunteered for 20 years, past the pharmacy where young Felix always asked about my arthritis with genuine concern. Then we kept driving, and driving. The familiar landmarks of my life fell away like shed skin. We were on the interstate now, heading north, and something cold settled in my chest. This wasn't the way to any restaurant I knew. Marcia's knuckles were white against the steering wheel, and she hadn't spoken in 20 minutes. "Marcia," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the alarm bells ringing in my head. "Where exactly are we going?" She glanced at me quickly, then back at the road. "I told you, it's a surprise. We've been driving for over an hour. What restaurant is this far away?" Her laugh sounded like breaking glass. "Not a restaurant, Eileen. Somewhere better. Somewhere permanent." The word hung in the air between us like a threat. I felt my body go very still, the way a rabbit freezes when it senses the hawk's shadow. Every instinct I'd honed over 7 decades of living screamed danger, but I forced myself to think, to plan. My phone was in my purse, resting on my lap. With careful, deliberate movements, I unzipped the top and slipped my hand inside. My arthritic fingers found the familiar shape of my iPhone, a gift from Harry last Christmas that I'd initially resisted but now treasured. I'd learned to text, despite my children's assumptions that I was too old for technology. "It's a place for women like you," Marcia continued, her voice taking on that horrible, patronizing tone she used when she thought she was being kind. "You'll be safe there, taken care of. You won't have to worry about maintaining that big old house anymore, or cooking for yourself, or, well, being alone. My thumb found the phone's home button. The screen lit up, and I angled it carefully so Marcia couldn't see. Years of late-night anxiety had taught me to navigate this device in the dark, and muscle memory guided me now. Messages, recent conversations. There, Sean Wahlberg, my attorney, a good man who'd handled Teddy's estate and had been helping me with some arrangements over the past several months. I typed one word, now. The message sent with a soft whoosh that was swallowed by the road noise. Marcia was still talking, something about how Percy thought this was best, how they'd found a lovely facility with activities and other women my age, how I shouldn't be stubborn about accepting help, but I wasn't listening anymore. I was remembering the conversation I'd had with Sean 3 months ago, when I'd first started to suspect what my family was planning. The hushed phone calls that stopped when I entered the room. The way Percy had started asking pointed questions about my finances, my medications, my ability to live independently. The real estate agent who'd accidentally knocked on my door, asking if I'd ever considered selling. "Eileen, you need to understand," Sean had said, leaning forward in his leather chair, his expression grave. "If they're planning to have you declared incompetent or in need of care, they could move very quickly. These things can happen fast, especially if they have medical professionals who will support their claims. You need to be prepared." So I had prepared. Not just legally, though Sean had helped me put safeguards in place that would shock my children when they discovered them, but emotionally. I'd known this day would come. I'd seen it in Marcia's calculating eyes, in Percy's guilty avoidance, in the way they spoke about me as if I weren't there. The highway stretched ahead of us, carrying me away from everything I'd ever known. But as I watched the mile markers flash by, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Power. They thought they were so clever, so careful. They'd underestimated the old woman in the passenger seat, the way predators always underestimate their prey. Marcia's phone buzzed in the cup holder between us. Then again. Then it started ringing. "Aren't you going to answer that?" I asked mildly. "It can wait," she said, but I could see tension creeping into her shoulders. The phone stopped ringing, then immediately started again. "Maybe it's Percy," I suggested. "Maybe it's important." Marcia's jaw tightened. She grabbed the phone and glanced at the screen, then quickly silenced it without answering. But not before I saw the name. Sunset Manor. Sunset Manor. The nursing home about 2 hours north of town. The same nursing home where Mrs. Violet from my bridge club had been sent by her son last year, against her will. She'd died within 6 months, her spirit broken long before her body gave up. The phone buzzed with a text message. Marcia's eyes darted between the screen and the road, and I watched her face pale. "Is everything all right, dear?" I asked, allowing just a hint of sweetness to enter my voice. Marcia didn't answer. She was staring at her phone, her mouth slightly open, her carefully composed mask slipping for the first time since I'd known her. Another text came through, then another. The SUV began to slow, and Marcia pulled over at the next exit. Her hands were shaking now as she read whatever messages were flooding her phone. She looked at me, and for the first time in 15 years, I saw fear in her eyes. "Eileen?" she said slowly. "What did you do?" I smiled. A real smile. Not the polite, defeated expression I'd worn for years while they planned my disappearance. "I protected myself," I said simply. In the distance, I could hear sirens. The sirens grew louder as Marcia fumbled with her phone, her perfectly manicured fingers sliding across the screen. 2 state police cruisers appeared in the rearview mirror, their red and blue lights painting the interior of the SUV in alternating colors of authority and justice. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." The trooper's voice was calm but firm as he approached Marcia's window. He was young, maybe 30, with kind eyes that reminded me of my grandson, if my grandson had ever bothered to visit. Marcia's face had gone ashen. "Officer, I don't understand. We were just—" "Ma'am, I need you to step out of the vehicle. Now." As Marcia complied on shaking legs, the second officer came to my door. "Mrs. Haddish? I'm Trooper Hanks. Are you all right?" "I'm perfectly fine, thank you." I accepted his offered hand and stepped out onto the shoulder of the highway. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of dying leaves and something else. Freedom, perhaps. "Your attorney, Mr. Wahlberg, contacted our dispatch about 30 minutes ago. He said you were in potential danger and provided us with your location." Trooper Hanks's radio crackled with dispatcher chatter. He's on his way. I watched Marcia being questioned by the first officer, her composure cracking like old paint. She kept gesturing toward me, her voice rising in pitch as she tried to explain what couldn't be explained away: the attempted kidnapping of an elderly woman under the guise of a birthday lunch. "Officer, you don't understand," Marcia was saying. "She's confused. She has dementia. She needs care. Professional care. We're trying to help her." The lie rolled off her tongue so smoothly, it was almost believable. Almost. "Ma'am, we're going to need to see some documentation supporting those claims," the trooper said. "Medical records, court orders, power of attorney." Marcia's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Because, of course, there were no medical records, no diagnosis, no legal authority, just a plan that had been months in the making, built on assumptions and greed, and the belief that a 77-year-old woman would be too weak, too trusting, too defeated to fight back. Another car pulled up, a familiar silver sedan that made my heart lift. Sean Wahlberg emerged, his gray hair slightly disheveled, his usually impeccable suit jacket wrinkled as if he'd thrown it on in haste. Behind his wire-rimmed glasses, his eyes were sharp with barely contained fury. "Eileen, thank God." He reached me in 3 quick strides, his hands gentle as he took my shoulders. "Are you hurt? Did she—" "I'm fine, Sean, just as we planned." His relief was palpable. "The GPS tracker worked perfectly. We were able to follow your location in real time." He glanced toward Marcia, who was now being read her rights. "She was taking you to Sunset Manor, wasn't she?" I nodded. "She called it a place for women like me. Said I'd be safe there." Sean's jaw tightened. "Safe from what? From living your own life? From making your own choices?" Over the past 3 months, Sean had helped me prepare for this day with the thoroughness of a military strategist. The GPS tracker hidden in my purse had been his idea, along with the code word system that would trigger immediate police response. But the deeper preparations, those had been my own design, born from 77 years of watching, learning, and understanding the true nature of the people around me. "Mrs. Haddish," Trooper Hanks returned to my side, "we're going to need a full statement from you. Would you prefer to do that at the station, or would you be more comfortable somewhere else?" "Actually," Sean interjected, "if it's acceptable to you, we could go to my office. It's only 20 minutes from here, and Mrs. Haddish might be more comfortable in familiar surroundings." As we made arrangements, I watched Marcia being placed in the back of the patrol car. Her designer sunglasses had been removed, revealing eyes that were no longer cold and calculating but wide with panic. She was making frantic phone calls, probably to Percy, probably to her lawyer, probably to anyone who might help her spin this situation back under her control. But control was no longer hers to wield. During the drive to Sean's office, sitting in the passenger seat of his sedan, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had almost happened. Not just the attempted kidnapping, though that was violation enough, but the months of systematic preparation, the careful erosion of my autonomy, the casual cruelty with which they had planned to dispose of me. "How did you know?" Sean asked quietly. "What made you first suspect?" I thought back to the moment when everything became clear. It was Christmas dinner last year. Marcia was talking about her friend's mother, how they'd found a lovely memory care facility for her, how much happier the family was now that they didn't have to worry. The way she looked at me when she said it, I knew. And Percy? How much does he know? The question I'd been dreading. My firstborn, the baby I'd held through pneumonia when he was 3, the boy I'd driven to baseball practice every weekend for 8 years, the young man I'd helped through college and his first heartbreak. What did he know? What had he chosen not to know? "Enough," I said simply. "He knows enough." Sean's office was a sanctuary of dark wood and leather, filled with law books and the comfortable weight of accumulated wisdom. As I settled into the familiar chair across from his desk, he poured 2 glasses of water from a crystal pitcher, a small kindness that spoke to his understanding of shock and its aftermath. "Tell me everything," he said, opening a leather-bound notepad. "From the beginning." So I did. I told him about Marcia's unusual invitation, about the long drive to nowhere, about the sickening realization that I was being transported like cargo to a place I'd never agreed to go. I told him about the phone calls to Sunset Manor, about Marcia's casual mention of it being permanent, about the way she'd spoken as if the decision had already been made without my input or consent. "What happens now?" I asked when I'd finished. Sean set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. "Now, Eileen, your family discovers what you've been preparing for, and I suspect they're going to be very surprised." He was right, of course. By the time Marcia was released on bail 3 hours later, news of her arrest had reached Percy. By the time Percy called my house, the first time he'd called in 6 months, I was already home, having been driven there by a very apologetic Trooper Hanks, who seemed personally offended that anyone would try to harm such a lovely lady. The phone rang 17 times that evening. I didn't answer. My cell phone buzzed constantly with text messages. I read each one with the detached interest of an anthropologist studying a particularly aggressive species. "Mom, please call me. There's been a misunderstanding. This is all Marcia's fault. I never wanted this. We need to talk. I'm coming over. Mom, please, call me back." I turned off the phone and made myself a cup of tea. Earl Grey. The good stuff I'd been saving for special occasions. Today qualified as special, I decided. Today was the day I'd saved my own life. As I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by 43 years of memories, I thought about the woman I'd been this morning, frightened, isolated, preparing to be led like a lamb to slaughter. That woman felt like a stranger to me now. This woman, the one holding a warm cup between her palms and planning her next move with crystal clarity, felt like someone I'd been waiting my whole life to become. The doorbell rang at 9:30. Then the knocking started. Then Percy's voice, muffled through the heavy oak door Teddy had installed after our break-in scare 15 years ago. "Mom, I know you're in there. Please just let me explain." I sipped my tea and said nothing. "Mom, Marcia made a mistake. She thought she was trying to help. She was worried about you living alone, and the lies came so easily to him. Perhaps they always had, and I'd simply chosen not to hear them. Mom, please, we're family. Family." The word that had been weaponized against me for years, used to justify every boundary crossed, every decision made without my consent, every slow, systematic reduction of my personhood to a problem to be managed. I stood and walked to the living room window. Percy stood on my porch, his face illuminated by the yellow glow of the porch light. At 52, he looked older than his years. Stress lines around his eyes, gray threading through his dark hair, shoulders that curved inward as if carrying an invisible weight. He looked like a man who'd just realized that his carefully constructed world was about to collapse. He was right to be worried. I opened my laptop, another gift from Harry that my children assumed I barely knew how to use, and began typing an email. The recipient list was long and carefully curated. Harry in California, Lori 2 towns over, Percy's 3 children who barely knew I existed, Marcia's parents who'd always treated me with cool politeness, and every single person who'd been excluded from family gatherings over the past 5 years, while Marcia rebuilt our family in her own image. The subject line was simple: what really happened on my 77th birthday. As I typed, Percy's knocking gradually faded to silence. But I knew he was still out there, probably sitting in his car, trying to figure out how to spin this, how to make it my fault, how to convince everyone that the crazy old lady had overreacted to an act of kindness. He had no idea what was coming. The email sent at 11:47 p.m. with a soft chime that felt like a church bell tolling. I closed the laptop and went to bed, sleeping better than I had in months. Outside, Percy's car remained parked across the street, a silent vigil that spoke to desperation rather than devotion. I woke at 6 a.m. to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. The digital avalanche had begun. My granddaughter Maria, Percy's eldest at 24, had called 6 times. Maria, who I hadn't spoken to in 2 years, who had been told I was getting confused and didn't like visitors anymore. Her last text, sent at 3:22 a.m., simply read, "Grandma, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I'm driving down from Boston today." Harry's response came from California at what must have been 4 in the morning his time. "Jesus Christ, Mom. Why didn't you tell me? I'm booking the next flight out." Lori's message was predictably self-serving. "Mom, we need to discuss this privately before it gets blown out of proportion. Think about the family. The family. Always the family, as if I weren't part of it. as if my kidnapping was a public relations problem rather than a crime. But it was the message from Marcia's mother, Marina, that surprised me most. Eileen, I am mortified. Seth and I had no idea what Marcia was planning. This is unforgivable. Please know that not all of us condoned this behavior. I made coffee and toast, simple morning rituals that felt revolutionary after yesterday's chaos, and reviewed the responses that continued to flood my phone. 23 people had replied to my email. 23 people who now knew the truth about Marcia's kindness and Percy's concern. 23 people who understood that the narrative they'd been fed, poor, confused Eileen needing professional care, was a lie constructed to justify the unjustifiable. At 8 a.m., Maria's car pulled into my driveway. She emerged looking exactly like her father had at her age. Dark hair, serious eyes, that particular stubborn set to her chin that ran in our family. But unlike Percy, she walked up my path with purpose rather than guilt. I opened the door before she could knock. Grandma Eileen. Her voice broke on my name, and suddenly she was 24 going on 7, the little girl who used to help me make cookies and beg for just one more story before bed. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I let her hold me. This granddaughter I'd been told didn't want to see me anymore. Her shoulders shook with the kind of genuine remorse I hadn't heard from her father in years. How much did you know? I asked when she finally pulled back. Nothing. I swear to you, nothing. Dad told us you were having memory problems, that you'd asked not to have visitors because they confused you. He said the doctor recommended limited contact until you were more stable. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. But after reading your email last night, I called Dr. Dave's office. They said you hadn't been seen there in over a year, and when you were last there, you were completely lucid. So they'd thought of everything. My loving family, fake medical concerns to justify isolation, false doctors' recommendations to excuse abandonment, the systematic construction of a narrative that painted me as incompetent and them as reluctantly responsible. Your father, I said carefully. What has he told you about yesterday? Maria's face hardened in a way that reminded me of myself. He called at midnight, crying, said Marcia had made a terrible mistake, that she'd panicked about your safety and made a bad decision. He kept saying it wasn't his fault, that he never meant for it to go this far. And what do you think? She looked me directly in the eyes. Another family trait, that unflinching honesty when it mattered. I think my father is a coward who let his wife plan to dump his mother in a nursing home against her will, and now he's scared because he got caught. The clarity of youth. Sometimes it cuts straight to the heart of things that adults spent years dancing around. We spent the morning sorting through the responses to my email. Maria read each one aloud, her anger building with every message of shock and support from family members who'd been told I was too difficult to visit, too unstable for normal contact. At noon, Harry called. My youngest son's voice was tight with fury and exhaustion. He'd caught the red-eye from Los Angeles and was currently in a taxi from the airport. Mom, I've been calling Percy all morning. He won't answer. He's probably consulting lawyers, I said. Or trying to figure out how to blame this on Marcia alone. Is that what you want? To see them prosecuted? The question I'd been avoiding, even in my own mind. What did I want? Justice? Revenge? Simple acknowledgement of the harm they'd tried to cause? I want them to face the consequences of their choices, I said finally. For the first time in years, I want them to experience what it feels like to have their lives disrupted by someone else's decisions. By 2 p.m., my house had become an unlikely command center. Harry had arrived with his laptop, immediately launching into research about elder abuse laws and civil rights violations. Maria was fielding calls from relatives I hadn't heard from in years, all of whom suddenly wanted to make sure I was okay and to express their horror at Marcia's actions. And then, Lori arrived. My daughter stood in my doorway looking every inch the suburban professional. Crisp blazer, expensive handbag, the kind of careful makeup that suggested she'd prepared for this like a business meeting, which, knowing Lori, she probably had. Mom, she didn't move to hug me, didn't show the raw emotion that had characterized Maria's arrival. We need to talk. Hello, Lori. Please come in and meet your family. The barb hit its mark. Lori's jaw tightened as she realized that Harry and Maria, People she should have been coordinating with about my care were hearing about yesterday's events for the first time through my email, rather than through family channels. This has gotten out of hand, Lori said, settling into Teddy's old recliner without invitation. Marcia made a mistake, yes, but broadcasting it to the entire extended family? Creating this kind of drama? It's not helping anyone. Drama? Maria's voice could have cut glass. Aunt Lori, she was kidnapped. Don't be ridiculous. She was being taken to a care facility, against her will, without her consent, after being lied to about where she was going. Harry's quiet intensity was more unsettling than shouting would have been. In legal terms, that's kidnapping. In human terms, it's unforgivable. Lori's composure cracked slightly. You don't understand the pressure we've been under. Mom's been isolated, stubborn about accepting help, refusing to acknowledge that she can't manage this big house anymore. Have you asked her what she wants? Maria interrupted. Have any of you actually asked Grandma what she wants for her own life? The silence that followed was answer enough. At 4 p.m., Sean arrived with a briefcase full of documents and news that made Lori go white. The district attorney's office has decided to proceed with charges, he announced, settling his considerable frame into my kitchen chair. Attempted kidnapping of an elderly person. Conspiracy to commit fraud. They're taking this very seriously. Fraud? Lori's voice was barely a whisper. Sean opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. We've been investigating your family's financial interest in Eileen's situation for several months. The real estate inquiries, the attempts to gain access to her bank accounts, the preliminary conversations with Sunset Manor about payment structures. He looked directly at Lori. Someone's been planning this for a long time, and someone's been coordinating the logistics. I watched my daughter's face cycle through denial, fear, and finally a cold calculation that reminded me uncomfortably of Marcia. This is harassment, Lori said. You're making it sound like some kind of conspiracy. Because it was, I said quietly. You've all been treating me like a problem to be solved rather than a person with rights. And now you're facing the consequences. Lori stood abruptly. I won't be part of this witch hunt. Mom, when you come to your senses and realize you need your family, you know where to find me. She left without saying goodbye to Harry or Maria, her heels clicking sharply against my hardwood floors. Through the window, I watched her sit in her car for several minutes, probably making frantic phone calls, before finally driving away. Are you okay? Maria asked, settling beside me on the couch. Was I okay? Yesterday I'd been a victim, powerless and afraid. Today I was surrounded by people who genuinely cared about my well-being, making my own decisions about my own life, watching the people who'd tried to dispose of me scramble to control damage of their own making. I'm more than okay, I said. I'm free. That evening, as Harry worked on his laptop and Maria made dinner in my kitchen, the first home-cooked meal I'd shared with family in over a year, Percy finally appeared at my door. He looked terrible. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes red-rimmed, his usually perfect hair disheveled. When I opened the door, he fell to his knees on my porch. Mom, please, I'm begging you. This is destroying my life. I looked down at my 52-year-old son, the man I'd raised to be better than this, kneeling on the same porch where he'd once brought me dandelions and declared his undying love. Stand up, Percy, I said. He did, hope flickering in his eyes. Now tell me, I continued, when exactly you plan to let me make the decision about my own life. Percy's mouth opened and closed wordlessly, like a man drowning in shallow water. Behind me I could hear Harry's typing pause, and Maria's quiet movements in the kitchen stop. My question hung in the evening air, simple and devastating. Mom, we thought. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his childhood when he'd been caught in a lie. You've seemed so lonely, so isolated. The house is too big for you and we were worried. Stop. The word came out sharper than I'd intended, but it had the desired effect. Percy fell silent. I didn't ask for your rationalizations. I asked when you planned to let me choose my own future. We were going to talk to you. When? After you'd already made the arrangements? After you'd already paid the deposit at Sunset Manor? I stepped closer, and he instinctively backed away. I know about the deposit, Percy. $5,000 paid 6 weeks ago. Were you planning to consult me before or after you cashed in my life insurance policy to cover the monthly fees? His face went ashen. How did you know about that too? I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Because unlike you, I pay attention to my own financial affairs. Unlike you, I've spent the last 3 months preparing for exactly this conversation. From inside the house, I heard Harry's sharp intake of breath and the scrape of his chair as he stood. Maria appeared in the doorway behind me, her young face hard with an anger that made her look startlingly like Teddy in his more formidable moments. "Grandpa's life insurance," she said slowly, understanding dawning in her voice. "That's what you were after. That's why the nursing home." Percy's shoulders sagged. "Maria, sweetheart, you don't understand the complexities." "I understand that you tried to steal from your own mother," she said flatly. "I understand that you planned to warehouse her so you could get your hands on her money. It's not stealing if it's going toward her care. Care she never consented to." Harry's voice carried from the living room, tight with barely controlled fury. "Jesus, Percy, do you even hear yourself?" I watched my firstborn son realize that his carefully constructed justifications were crumbling around him. The narrative he'd built concerned children making difficult but necessary decisions for an aging parent, was being exposed for what it really was. Financial opportunism dressed up as filial duty. "How much did you need?" I asked quietly. "What?" "The money. How much did you need?" I kept my voice level, almost conversational. "What drove you to plan the disposal of your own mother?" Percy's face cycled through several emotions before settling on a defeated sort of honesty. "The business is failing. Has been for 2 years. Marcia's spending. We borrowed against the house. Maxed out the credit cards. The insurance money would have given us enough to start over. And my monthly Social Security? My pension? Those would have gone to Sunset Manor, I assume, keeping me warehoused until the life insurance paid out." He nodded miserably. I felt something cold and final settle in my chest. Not anger. Anger was hot and immediate. This was something else entirely. Clarity, perhaps. The absolute certainty that comes when you finally see someone exactly as they are, without the obscuring veil of love or hope or willful blindness. "Maria," I said without taking my eyes off Percy, "would you please bring me the folder from my desk? The red one." Maria disappeared into the house, returning moments later with the folder I'd been compiling for months. I opened it and withdrew a single sheet of paper, a bank statement showing a balance that made Percy's eyes widen. "Surprised?" I asked. "Your father was a careful man, Percy. He invested well, saved consistently, and left me very comfortable. Comfortable enough to maintain this house for the rest of my life. Comfortable enough to help my children and grandchildren if they needed it. If they'd asked." Percy stared at the number on the page. "Mom, if I'd known you had this much, I never would have—" "What? You never would have tried to have me committed? You never would have conspired with your wife to kidnap me? You never would have lied to my grandchildren about my mental state?" I took the statement back and returned it to the folder. "Or, you just would have asked for the money directly." I was ashamed. He whispered, "I didn't want you to know what a failure I'd become. So instead, you decided to make me disappear." Harry appeared beside Maria, his laptop tucked under his arm. My younger son looked like a prosecutor preparing for closing arguments. "Percy, I've spent the day reviewing Mom's finances. She's not just comfortable. She's wealthy enough to live independently for decades. Wealthy enough to hire the best private care if she ever needs it. Wealthy enough to make her own choices about her own future. But she's alone," Percy said desperately. "She doesn't have friends, doesn't socialize, because Marcia systematically cut her off from everyone," Maria snapped. "Because you've spent 5 years isolating her from the family. Because you made her believe she was a burden instead of a person worth knowing." I watched my son absorb the full scope of what he'd done, not just the kidnapping attempt, but the years of emotional erosion that had preceded it. The slow, careful work of making me small enough to ignore, invisible enough to dispose of. "The charges against Marcia will proceed," I said. "Sean thinks she'll plea bargain, probably serve 6 months. As her co-conspirator, you could face similar consequences." "Mom, please." "But I'm willing to make you a deal." Hope flickered in his eyes, pathetic and desperate. "You will sell your house," I continued. You will pay back every penny you borrowed against my future care. You will attend counseling, both individual and marriage, for at least a year. You will write letters to every family member you lied to about my condition, explaining exactly what you did and why. Okay. Yes. Anything. I'm not finished. My voice carried the authority of 7 decades of life experience, of lessons learned and wisdom earned. You will also accept that your relationship with me is contingent on your behavior going forward. No more automatic forgiveness because we share DNA. No more presumed access to my life because you're my son. From now on, you earn your place in my world. Mom, I understand. I'll do whatever you want. What I want, I said, is for you to understand that I am not your inheritance. I am not your retirement plan. I am not a problem to be managed or a burden to be shifted. I am a human being with rights and dignity and the capacity to make my own decisions about my own life. Percy was crying now, tears streaming down his face in a way I hadn't seen since he was a child. But I felt no urge to comfort him, no maternal instinct to soothe his pain. He had forfeited that privilege when he decided to treat me as property rather than family. There's something else, Harry said, stepping forward with his laptop open. Maria and I have been talking, and we want to propose something. He turned the screen toward me, showing what appeared to be a real estate listing. A charming cottage with a wraparound porch, large windows, and a garden that looked professionally maintained. It's in my neighborhood in San Francisco, Harry said. 3 blocks from my house. The owner is willing to rent with an option to buy. You could be close to family who actually wants you around. Grandchildren who would love to know their grandmother. A community where you could start fresh. And leave all this behind. I gestured toward the house that had been my home for over 4 decades. Or keep this as a summer house, Maria suggested. You can afford both, Grandma. You could split your time, have the best of everything. Independence and family support. I looked at my younger son and my granddaughter, seeing in their faces the love and respect that had been missing from my life for so long. Then I looked at Percy, still standing on my porch, still hoping for absolution he hadn't earned. I need time to think, I told Harry and Maria. Then I turned to Percy. You need to leave now. Come back when you've begun making amends. Real amends, not just promises. When you've started counseling, started paying restitution, started treating this situation like the crime it was instead of a misunderstanding you can explain away. Mom, go, Percy, before I change my mind about offering you a second chance. He left, finally, his shoulders bowed under the weight of consequences he'd never expected to face. From my living room window, I watched him sit in his car for nearly 10 minutes before finally driving away. Are you okay? Maria asked, settling beside me on the couch. I'm tired, I admitted. But I'm also free. For the first time in years, I get to decide what comes next. Harry closed his laptop and looked at me seriously. Whatever you decide about California, you should know that we want you in our lives. Not as a burden or an obligation, but because you're our family and we love you. As I sat between my son and granddaughter, I realized that Marcia had been wrong about one thing. This wasn't a place for women like me. Women who'd been discarded, dismissed, treated as inconvenient reminders of their children's mortality. This was a place for women like me to begin again. 3 months later, I stood on the wraparound porch of my California cottage, watching my great-grandson Nolan chase butterflies through a garden I was still learning to tend. At 7, he had Harry's stubborn chin and Maria's fearless curiosity, along with an absolute certainty that his great-grandmother was the most fascinating person in the world. Grandma Great, he called, using the title he'd invented for me. The orange cat is back. Sure enough, a ginger tabby had appeared by my garden gate, the same one that had been visiting for weeks. Stray cats had always found me, even back in Pennsylvania. Teddy used to joke that I had some invisible sign that marked me as an easy touch for lost creatures. His name is Marmalade, announced my newest ally, appearing around the corner of the house with a bag of cat food. 68-year-old Deborah Schumer had been my neighbor for exactly 3 months, and my closest friend for 2 months and 29 days. She'd introduced herself the day after I moved in by bringing over homemade soup and staying to help me unpack my kitchen. You can't keep feeding him, I protested half-heartedly. He'll never leave. Good, Deborah said, settling into the wicker chair beside mine. Every woman our age needs something to worry about besides her own mortality. Besides, he's already chosen you. Look, Marmalade had indeed made himself at home on my porch, cleaning his whiskers with the satisfied air of a cat who knew he'd found his person, much like Deborah herself, who'd somehow become indispensable to my daily routine without my quite noticing how it happened. Any word from Percy? Deborah asked, her tone carefully neutral. He's still in counseling. Sends progress reports every week like homework assignments. I watched Nolan discover the butterfly garden Harry had helped me plant. Sean says Marcia took the plea bargain. 4 months in county, 2 years probation, and she has to pay restitution. And Lori? Lori. My middle child had chosen her side definitively. When she realized I wouldn't be returning to Pennsylvania, she'd cut contact entirely. No birthday call this year, no Christmas card, no acknowledgement that I existed anywhere but in her guilty conscience. Radio silence, I said, which is probably best for both of us. Deborah nodded without judgment. She'd lived long enough to understand that sometimes family ties become chains, and the kindest thing you can do for everyone involved is to cut them cleanly. The sound of Harry's car in the driveway brought Nolan running. Daddy, Great-grandma let me help plant the tomatoes and there's a cat and Mrs. Deborah made cookies. Harry emerged from his Tesla looking every inch the successful tech executive, but his face lit up with genuine joy at the sight of his son's excitement. At 45, my youngest had found the perfect balance between career success and family devotion, a lesson his older siblings had never learned. How was the appointment? He asked, settling into the third porch chair. Clean bill of health, I reported. Doctor, Hank says my blood pressure is better than it's been in years, and she's impressed with how much weight I've lost. The California lifestyle, Deborah observed. Walks on the beach, fresh vegetables from the farmer's market, and no toxic family members poisoning your system. Harry laughed. Deborah, you're terrible. I'm honest. There's a difference. As if summoned by the mention of family, my phone buzzed with a text from Maria. Flying out next weekend for Nolan's soccer game. Can I stay with you? This had become our new normal. Maria visited once a month, officially to see Harry and the grandchildren, but really to spend time with me. She'd become the granddaughter I'd never had the chance to know. Fierce and funny and absolutely determined to make up for lost time. Maria's coming for the weekend, I announced. Good, Harry said. She mentioned wanting to talk to you about something. What kind of something? The kind she should tell you herself. As evening approached, Deborah returned to her own cottage with promises to check on Marmalade later. Harry collected Nolan for his bath and bedtime routine, leaving me alone on the porch with my thoughts and the cat who'd apparently adopted me. My phone rang. Percy's weekly call, as punctual as clockwork since his world collapsed. Hi, Mom. His voice still carried the weight of shame, but there was something else now, too. A kind of exhausted relief. As if confession had finally freed him to be honest. How are you, Percy? Better, I think. The counselor says I'm making progress. Marcia and we're separating, probably permanently. I felt no satisfaction at this news, just a distant sadness for the wreckage of a life built on false foundations. I'm sorry to hear that. Don't be. It's the right thing. We weren't good for each other, or for anyone else. He paused. I've been thinking about what you said, about earning my place in your life, and I want to visit, not to ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve that yet. Just to see where you are now, to understand who you've become without us dragging you down. The old Eileen might have said yes immediately, grateful for any crumb of attention from her firstborn. The new Eileen considered the request carefully. You can visit, I said finally, but you'll stay in a hotel. And you'll come because you want to know me, not because you need something from me. I understand. Thank you, Mom, for giving me another chance. After we hung up, I sat in the gathering dusk, stroking Marmalade's sun-warmed fur and thinking about chances. Second chances. Last chances. The chances we give ourselves when we finally stop waiting for other people's permission to live our own lives. My phone buzzed with another text, this one from a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Haddish? This is Anne Hanks. Dr. Hanks's daughter. My mom mentioned you're looking for volunteer opportunities. Would you be interested in helping with our literacy program? We work with immigrant families, and we could really use someone with your patience and experience. I stared at the message, remembering the woman I'd been 6 months ago, isolated, invisible, waiting to be disposed of like unwanted furniture. That woman would never have imagined sitting on a California porch, being sought out for her skills and experience rather than managed for her supposed deficiencies. Yes, I typed back. I'd love to help. The next morning brought Maria, arriving earlier than expected with her usual whirlwind energy and an armload of flowers from the airport gift shop. Grandma! She swept me into a hug that smelled like airplane coffee and expensive perfume. You look amazing. California suits you. What did you want to talk to me about? I asked as we settled in the kitchen with fresh coffee and Deborah's leftover cookies. Maria's expression grew serious. I've been thinking about what happened, about all the years we lost because of the lies we were told about you, and I realized something. There are probably other people in similar situations. Older adults being isolated, manipulated, cut off from their support systems. And I want to start a nonprofit. Elder advocacy, legal support, maybe even a hotline for people who suspect their relatives are being taken advantage of. She leaned forward, her eyes bright with passion. I want to use what happened to you to help other people, but I need your permission first. I set down my coffee cup, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was proposing. Maria, that's extraordinary. Is that a yes? That's a hell yes, I said, and she laughed at my language. But I want to be involved. Not just as a cautionary tale, but as an active participant. Really? You'd want to do that? Sweetheart, 3 months ago I thought my life was over. Now I'm discovering it might just be beginning. We spent the weekend planning, Maria's business school training meshing perfectly with my 7 decades of practical experience. By Sunday evening, we had the foundation of something that could genuinely help people. A legacy built not from bitterness, but from the determination to ensure that what happened to me wouldn't happen to others. As Maria prepared to leave, she hugged me tightly. I love you, Grandma. I love who you are now, and I love who you've always been, underneath all the ways they tried to diminish you. I love you too, sweetheart. That night, as I prepared for bed in my own house, in my own room, making my own choices about my own life, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was 77 years old, silver-haired, and marked by the lines that come from genuine living rather than mere survival. She was also powerful in ways she'd never been before. Not the power that comes from controlling others, but the power that comes from absolute sovereignty over one's own existence. Marmalade appeared at my bedroom window, having apparently learned the layout of his new territory. I opened the window and he strolled in as if he'd always belonged here, settling on the foot of my bed with proprietary satisfaction. Well, I said to him, I suppose you're staying. He purred his agreement, and I understood that this was how new lives began. Not with grand gestures or dramatic proclamations, but with quiet acceptances of the love and belonging that appear when you finally have the courage to claim the life you deserve. Outside my window, California stars wheeled overhead in patterns I was still learning to read. But inside, surrounded by the accumulated treasures of a life finally lived on my own terms, I fell asleep to the sound of contentment, my own and the cat's, and the profound satisfaction that comes from discovering you're stronger than anyone, including yourself, ever imagined possible.